Well, we're glad to start another week of our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast. If you've been with us for the last several weeks, you know we're working our way through the book of Job, this fascinating Old Testament book of wisdom literature. Unlike any other book in the Bible, really, but it's so fascinating. And we've been working through the dialogues for a long time of Job and his friends. We know the first chapter or two, what happened to Job and the problems he went through and all the details there. And then we know a little bit later on, we'll be looking at the end results of all this. But these discussions, these dialogues that Job and his friends have, is often skipped over by many people. And we're trying to look at them and see what God has for us. God didn't put this in his word for us to ignore and to just run through briefly. He has it here for a purpose, and I hope we're uncovering some of those. Now, right now, we are at chapter 34, or 35, and we're in the middle of Elihu's dialogue. Elihu is the younger friend of Job. The first three friends have already had their rounds at Job. They said all they wanted to say. Largely, they're messed up in their worldview, having more of a prosperity style of understanding of life, that kind of a karma worldview, where if you do right, good things come to you. If you do bad, bad things come. Job was in a bad situation, therefore he must be bad. Job has defended himself and said that's not true, and yet his worldview is not any different. He says the problem has to lie not with himself, but with God. Now Elihu finally has enough of it. He steps up and he begins to talk about, he wants to give some insights he doesn't believe the friends have given and that Job has missed. So he's being pretty strong here. And like I said, we're in about the middle of his discussion. In chapter 35, verses 1 to 3, he summarizes for us what he believes Job's view of these things are and Job's spiritual response. He says, Then Elihu continued, verse 1, and said, Do you think this is according to justice? Do you say my righteousness is more than God's? For you say, What advantage will it be to you? What profit will I have more than if I'd sinned? So he points out two things that he sees Job in error concerning. First of all, he seems to think he's more righteous than God. And although Job would deny that, I think Elihu is onto something. When he challenges God and says God is wrong, that God has misunderstood him, or God has got something in the system that's all goofed up, when he's saying that, he has to be saying he's more righteous than God. He's got it better together than God does. So I think Elihu's right. And the second thing is in verse 3, what profit will I have more than if I had sinned? They said, look, I mean, what advantage is there? What profit is there in living righteously if this is going to happen to me? Why shouldn't I just go ahead and sin and just live any way I want to? The end results would have been the same. And I think we're tempted to say that sometimes, even the best of us. Why things aren't going well? Life is tough. What advantage was there for me to live in God's way, in a godly way? And that's a temptation that we face. And Elihu thinks Job is going there, and I think Elihu is probably right. In verses 6 and 7, he reminds Job that our behavior does not change God. He says, if you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are many, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? He is saying, God is immutable. You don't change God. Your righteous behavior doesn't change God. Your sinful behavior doesn't change God. And therefore, he's pointing out the unchangeable, the immutable nature of God himself. But in verse 14, he says, how much less when you say you do not behold him, the case is before him, and you must wait for him. He is saying here, look, like Job, you don't have patience. You're lacking the patience that you should have. We often hear about the patience of Job. That's pretty much a cliche that's run around forever, having the patience of Job. But Job is not being particularly patient in these chapters, and Elihu is calling him out for that. Job is lacking patience. He needs to wait before God. What God is up to, what God wants to accomplish, we don't know. Job doesn't know himself, but he knows that God knows. And Job needs to wait on the Lord. In verse 16, He says this. So Job opens his so Job opens his mouth emptily. He multiplies words without knowledge. He is in essence saying, Job, you're speaking nonsense here. What you're saying does not make sense. You're speaking blindly. You're speaking ignorantly. Here's the nature of the true God, and you're speaking as if that is not true, and therefore you are multiplying words without knowledge. That's a really good point that Elihu is making. So far he seems to be on track. He's rebuking Job pretty strongly, obviously, and we never actually see Job's response to Elihu's dialogue, because God is going to jump in here later. But Elihu is definitely more on track than the other friends have been. So we're learning some things here. We'll pick up the rest of his dialogue tomorrow.